Welcome to the Relational Recovery Podcast. I'm your host, Wes Thompson, joined by my co-host, Austin Hill. Today, we're talking about leadership, community, and appropriate expectations. So we hope this conversation is helpful, and thanks for listening. Hey, Austin, how are you?
Not bad. How are you doing, Wes?
I'm pretty good, man. Pretty good. You just got back from vacation, so you're probably feeling nice and rested.
I am. Ready to get going.
Well, let's talk about leadership, community, and appropriate expectations. I think so. I'm looking at a couple of these notes. That seems to be the thing, and this is going to be stuff that I am genuinely wrestling with right now. These are notes that I took a long time ago, and this stuff's hard after you kind of get beat up a bit. First of all, some definitions. At the end of the day, a Christian leader is someone who is aiming to be a disciple of Jesus, and then is pushing others to be disciples of Jesus. Pretty straightforward. Easier said than done. Because leadership at the end of the day, I think one definition I like is knowing where people need to go, taking the initiative to get them there, pushing them to get there. And then the Christian part is doing that in God's way and by God's power. And it's tough because even as leaders, we're in process like anybody else is.
And I need to be in process.
We need, yeah. Well, the reality is we are. I think sometimes maybe we just don't realize it. And we think we're farther along than we are. We think that we've arrived. I think sometimes people have this view of leadership that people become leaders when they have the answers to all the questions, and that couldn't be farther from the truth. I think leaders that do the most harm are leaders that actually believe that.
Yeah, they have a name for someone who thinks they know everything. It's a know-it-all, and nobody enjoys being around a know-it-all. Yeah.
We are drawn towards charismatic leaders, though. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but just look at our political system, and you will find that that's pretty true. We like charismatic leaders. We like confident leaders. We like leaders that say they have all the answers, and that provide a map that says, hey, if you go this way, if you follow me, you'll live the good life. And that rarely ends well. And so I think the goal is that we're as humans, we're cultivating ourselves and others. Some of you listening might aspire to leadership or be a leader in some way. I mean, we're all leaders in some facet, whether maybe it's a small group, maybe it's your family, maybe it's a team at work. We're all leaders in some capacity. Some have more influence than others, but the goal is, I think, to first do our own work and recognize our own process. So to speak to character a little bit, a couple thoughts. There's a pastor in Texas, Matt Chandler. I like what he says. He says that the hypocrite grabs onto the language, but the heart isn't there. Man, I've been there many times. I can still wrestle with that, Hypocrite grabs onto the language, but the heart isn't there. I think why that stands out to me a bit is I think as we're advocating for ideas and things, it kind of goes with what we were just saying. I think we have to continue to take our own medicine to the best of our ability. It's hard when you've been doing something for a long time, because you inevitably change, and sometimes for the better, and sometimes you go through hard times, or maybe sometimes you feel like you're not changing for the better. But I think that hits me in an interesting spot, because I've been doing this work now for like Christian ministry work, even at the Refuge now, going on 9 years. But Christian ministry, like, I don't know, 16, 17 years, because I started too young. It can make it really beautiful, but also really challenging. So I don't want to make this about me, but I bring all that up to say that I'm in my own process as well. We don't arrive. The goal is that we continue to try to stay in the game and to continue to try to move forward. But our character, who we are, it's, is composed of our moral grid, of our which is our compass, I guess, for what's right and wrong. And the question that we're constantly having to ask ourselves is, are we being like Jesus in the way that we live? And so as leaders, we have to fight for our character. We have to continue to pursue who Jesus is. And all of this, because leadership infers that there's people around us, right? So community is inevitable. Like, you're not leading, unless you're leading a bunch of widgets, or you're leading a company that has no people, which I guess that kind of changes our definition of leadership. But leadership infers community. It assumes community because there's people around us. And so then we have to wrestle with the implications of community. And man, I'm talking a lot, but Austin, I don't know what you think, but we've talked about this a bit. Some we probably can't share here, but like, community's hard. Community's a lot harder than I ever thought it would be. And I've got a couple quotes here. And I read these quotes back in the day and I envisioned them so idealistically. But reading them now, I'm like, I still find them compelling. But after getting beat up quite a bit, it changes your perspective to where you're like, man. And then knowing that Bonhoeffer ultimately died. I'm going to read this quote by Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a Lutheran pastor in Germany. And I won't get into his whole story, but he was killed by the Nazi occupation, murdered, and trying to do what he thought was right, trying to be a faithful pastor. And but Bonhoeffer said, those who love their dream of a Christian community more than they love the Christian community itself become destroyers of that Christian community, even though their personal intentions may be ever so honest, earnest, and sacrificial. God hates this wishful dreaming because it makes the dreamer proud and pretentious. Those who dream of this idolized community demand that it be fulfilled by God, by others, and by themselves. If you didn't quite catch what he was saying, he really hits on it in the first line. He says, those who love their dream of Christian community more than they love the Christian community itself. That's the problem. He's saying, don't love the picture in your head. Don't love the idealized version more than you love what's actually in front of you. That hits personally, just to be a little vulnerable here, like that hits me hard because, frankly, in this last season, church has been hard. Christian community's been hard. It's been really difficult for me personally because I do community with a handful of people, but it's been different than it's ever been. And it's been really hard to engage the way that I want to, just because of energy, because of going through a lot of pain and in the past. And, I agree with Bonhoeffer, but it's hard. So I'll pause here and I'd love to hear some of your reflections and thoughts.
Yeah. Just jotting down some things as you were talking. The question, like at the very, very beginning, you said something we often in leadership or just in general, we often think we're further along than we actually are. I think everybody can relate to that. And like a lot of the things we talk about, there's kind of both sides of a ditch with that thought of, I've got this handled. Like, well, I'm sure there's guys hearing this who are in first or second phase are like, man, I think I've got this, recovery thing. I don't think I need to do all 13 months. When the reality is like, 13 months is not enough. Like it takes a long time to get your crap together, and you throw addiction on top of it. It takes a long time. So if you hear someone says like, hey, you need more time, that's not an insult to like your character or your intellect or your drive to be a good husband or father or worker. It's someone saying it's going to take some time for you to get to a healthy spot. And on the other, so that's one extreme. The other extreme is when someone is doing well and they just can't see it. They're like, I'm never going to get to this point. I'm never going to improve. I'm never going to get to where I want to be as a leader or as a man or just like a member of the community. And it's the only way we're able to have true clarity around where we're at and how we're actually doing is being in community that can be honest with you and tell you where you're at. Genuinely, consistently, that can say, remember where you were 3 months ago. This is how you've improved, or this is what you're still struggling with. This is still a challenge. That's honest. And so having those people around us is important, but being a leader, this has been the biggest challenge for me is we have to be the biggest influences in our lives. Like, I have to be able to have clarity around what I think about something, how I make decisions, or what direction I think that I need to go in. And we have to do that at the same time in community, because what I think should be changing and shifting and growing, because that's what growth looks like. It means changing. So I can't think that I'm the only influence on my life. I just have to have the biggest influence in my life. And again, saying this as a Christian, all of this is under the umbrella of trusting that God has a future for me that's better than I can imagine. And that's honestly really hard to do often. Most of the time, it's like, okay, sure. But that's what faith looks like. And that's been a huge challenge for me because I put my faith not in God for a long time. I put it into this dream version of what Christian community could look like. Because reading the Bible, reading about the early church, hearing about like the early leaders of the church, and even like some present day modern examples of Christians just doing this radical community together and solving really big problems, is inspiring and beautiful, but incredibly messy. And what it actually looks like in person is not at all beautiful, not at all clean. Like some examples are like the Christian community is one of the biggest influences on taking out American slavery. Christian community did that. And then also Christian community did it again and led the way again for civil rights in America. And that was super messy. People from different churches attacking each other, being angry, splitting, dividing families. It wasn't beautiful to look at. It was messy. Like the 60s were, if you think it's messy now in America, read about the 60s. There were bombs going off often, regularly, for all different reasons. Like it's always messy. And I think where I like to bring it back to this, where I was putting my faith in an idea of what community would look like is because I know and believe that community is the solution, because community is based in relationship with other people, and that's how God designed us, was to be in relationship. So if we just, worked together around these things, we can solve really big, epic, complicated problems like addiction. But this dream wasn't real. And I had this unrealistic expectation. And When that unrealistic expectation is not hit again and again and again, you're gonna be disappointed, and then being disappointed for so long about something that is doable, is really demoralizing a lot. But I think I've gained a lot of clarity because what I was dreaming about and loving was what Bonhoeffer was talking about in that quote, is like, I was in love with the dream, and if I am more in love with that dream, I'm gonna isolate and move away from God and move away from other Christians. And that's destroying. So, because to be a destroyer of community doesn't mean I go and attack it and try to tear it apart. It means leaving it sometimes. That's a broken relationship, is leaving or isolating or not being an active member or being present. That's destroying community also. So it's interesting that we have these three kind of points at the beginning of leadership, community, and appropriate expectations. I think it is appropriate for us to dream, and it's appropriate for us to also have this understanding that we're never going to see the beautiful Christian community of our dreams, because that's heaven. Like, that's it. Like, we can't be upset that we don't live in heaven. Like, it's like, oh yeah, like, cause man, if anybody who's hearing this has been in my office, I have a lot of books, and the lower shelf, half of it is about that, about working. Like, this has been something that people have been doing, I don't know, since, we figured out what fire was, and no one's figured it out perfectly yet. So, I mean, like, so it was an unrealistic expectation that I would be able to create heaven on earth. I can pray for it, like Jesus talks. It's like, bring your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Like, we can hope for that and pray for that, but we're never going to see that. And that's okay, because the part that we're entrusted with, that God gave us this like opportunities to be a part of building it, we're never going to see it completed. Like, we are literally cathedral builders. Like, when people, like, cathedrals are those massive churches that take 200 to 400 years to build. So the people that started it are never going to see it finished. And this cathedral of Christian community, we're never going to see finished, but we're always going to be building it. So, and what does it mean to build something you're never going to see the finish? It means I'm doing something for someone else. I'm trusting that someone's going to do this when I'm gone. That's faith. That's scary. So I don't know if that's the response that you were looking for, but that's what's coming to mind for me. Cause these are all, community is something that I love thinking about, but it is the most painful thing.
Mm-hmm. No, that was really good. I was having a conversation with somebody that I coached last week, and what you said about the cathedral analogy really struck me, because something that I've really had to work on personally, and that I was encouraging this individual to work on, is just how can I cultivate the perspective of just learning to enjoy the journey. And that might sound all trite and nice, but I think sometimes as leaders, we get fixated on the finished product. You alluded to it a minute ago, and you were like, this vision of community really was heaven. It's like we see in our brain, the guy who started, the community that maybe envisioned this cathedral was like, oh man, isn't it going to be beautiful? And you get fixated on the final product. And the person who when we think about Christian community, sometimes we can picture this perfect community that probably won't be realized till heaven. And that shouldn't lead us to this kind of feudalistic, oh, well, nothing matters, so I'm going to like moan and pout. But if we're not careful, that idealistic perspective, that isn't real until later. If we don't have the patience to tolerate that, we're going to quit. We're going to leave. We're not going to be able to last. And so there's got to be something that we can do to learn to just enjoy the process. I just imagine like the cathedral, maybe when it's like not even 10% built, if I came into that every day and realized, man, I'm never going to see this done, and then despair, then we might not even, then what if everybody just quit, So how can I cultivate the type of perspective that's like, man, I'm going to enjoy the process. Like, I'm going to trust that God's at work in the mess. Just, the picture that comes to mind to me is like one of my favorite movies is like the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It was, I love J.R. Tolkien. I love, C.S. Lewis and just some of their writing as a kid. But I imagine like the movies, if you ever seen the movies, it's any epic, it's like a lot of epic journeys. Frodo sets out to destroy this ring. And if all he did every day was fixate on, I've got to destroy this ring. I don't know that he could have endured, but he had some friends with him. He had one friend in particular, and there was lots of ups and downs along the journey. And the movie and the story wouldn't have been all that compelling if it was just like, well, one day there was this ring and the next day the ring was gone. Story's over. It's like there was a whole process. There was a whole journey. There was days and years involved. And for us, can we learn to enjoy the journey? Can we learn to enjoy? Can we recognize that God's at work in that process just as much as we kind of are excited about this final product? Because you talked about it a minute ago, but if there's a guy listening to this who's in like phase 1, first 30 days of the refuge, for example, you might be imagining, your life after the refuge. You might be imagining being reunited with your kids or your family, or having the job that you want, or having the house that you want. And I want all those things for you. But the reality is, if you get too fixated on that finish line, you might not make it. Because we have to go through the process of acquiring the character and acquiring the skills and acquiring the discipline that's going to result in those good things. And that's true for you, and that's true for me. And so something that I've constantly had to come back to and journal about and pray about is, Lord, help me embrace the process. Help me embrace the journey, and not get so fixated on the finish line that I miss out on the gift of life, on the gift of leadership, on the gift of community. That is incredibly painful and messy, but that's ultimately shaping me to become the person that God's called me to be. So yeah, I think there's something to that. I'm glad you said what you said, because I think it's true.
Yeah, there's an amount of, I think it can be almost like debilitating when you think about the reality. Like, I use the cathedral analogy on purpose, because the person who thought about that cathedral was motivated or inspired by another cathedral. So even when you complete one, it's not done. It's just a building. It's really beautiful, and it took a lot of hard work, and people sacrificed for it. But its purpose is to inspire something to replicate itself. So the work is never done. The example, how that kind of plays out is, if talking about Christians in the past, William Wilberforce was a British guy who helped end the Atlantic slave trade with the British Empire. So like, that was a global economy that he helped be a part of, that dismantled it piece by piece, slowly over time. And then when he did it, slavery wasn't over. It still happened, but he took a piece out. And then even then, like for the rest of his life, he kept doing small things that took a lot of effort to slowly make his world, where in his influence, a more Christ-like place. So the work, and like that was in the 1800s. The work is still going. There's still injustice in the world. There's still things that shouldn't happen that Christians are a part of that are fighting to make it better. So William Wilberforce didn't waste his time because it didn't end completely during his work. So he created something that inspired people. What he did inspired the civil rights movement, and the civil rights movement and the faith in our faith community is inspiring because we saw how Christians came together from different backgrounds where it was not okay. It was illegal in some places, but Christians did these things because they knew that they had a higher authority. That it's like, I am aiming towards a more beautiful future based on my belief in who Jesus is. Modeling, like living like Jesus means I have to model this type of community. And I'm motivated not just by Jesus's life, but by who Jesus influenced and motivated. So this is this constant step, where it's not, instead of it being debilitating when we first start thinking about it, it's realizing like I am a part of a much bigger, broader story. And none of it, and we're motivated by who this person in Jesus is, not by what I can complete. Because if it's always about what I can complete, then man, I'm going to be disappointed. Because 5 years ago, if you were to tell me where I am today, I'd be like, that's not possible. I don't think that's oh man, that would be it. I would want for nothing. I would be ecstatic about everything in life. But here I am looking around being like, there's still so much to do. There's still so many things I'd like to change or adjust or improve upon or support so it's never ending, but it's better than it was in a lot of ways. So it's not losing faith in that. And I think that's the painful part is realizing that it doesn't get easier in a lot. I wish I could just say hey, once you figure out this, it'll just be super great. It'll be super easy and there'll be no pain. That's just not real. It's how we handle pain. That's what changes, is how we handle it.
That's really good. So I think as we bring this conversation to a close, I think a lot of our joy in life does have to do somewhat with having appropriate expectations. As we grow, as we lead, as we first lead ourselves, and then aim to lead other people towards the good life, towards God, and towards healthy relationships and living. I think that we have to have a long-term perspective. We have to recognize that there's going to be a lot of bumps along the way, and there's going to be pushback. And the community that we envision, and the people that we envision, and the ideas that we envision, to try not to lose sight of the dreams and the visions and the excitement of what God's put in us, but to be sober-minded enough to realize that it's often not a straight, simple, easy line. That's going to come with ups and downs and pitfalls and pain, and not to let that derail us, but to learn, try to do our best to learn from it. And one of the best ways I think we do that is to be in community, is to have people around us that can, when we don't want to get up, are going to help us stand up, and when we want to throw in the towel and quit, are going to continue to step forward with us, because we're all going to have those days and moments. And that's why it's good to have to be surrounded by good people. And so that would be my biggest, I think, encouragement today for all of us is to embrace the good with the bad, and to surround yourself with good people. Because that's what I think is ultimately going to help people lead for the long haul. That's what's going to help you lead yourself for the long haul. And it's what's going to allow you to stay engaged and not become isolated. So any last thoughts from you, Austin?
I think it's be okay. It's going to be a process. So what I'm going to say isn't something once I hear it, then it'll be great. It's know that community is the most painful and most necessary thing in your life. You can't it's what creates a healthy life, is being in community, whether it's your family, your neighborhood where you work, the church you go to. That's the most important thing. It's necessary for us to thrive. It's also the most painful. They can be the same. So it is a hard thing to do, but it is an important, valuable thing to do.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Relational Recovery Podcast. We'll be back soon with a new conversation. We'll see you then.